Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Starless and Bible Black by the band King Crimson.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
I'll take it that if you're watching this video on this channel in this series, you know who King Crimson are. They are the forefathers of prog. They are amazing. Almost everyone that I know that likes prog likes these guys as well, and for a good reason. And this is a very interesting album to reviewing today as well. So here's some of my favorite bits from this album. So yeah, here we are again with King Crimson, the pioneers, the forefathers of progressive rock. They've made countless and timeless pieces in their runtime, and they've definitely showed us that prog is not to be reckoned with, as it is and will always be an immortal genre of music. And today's album that we're reviewing is called Starless and Bible Black. Now this one came slightly as a surprise to me because I didn't realize up until this moment that this album came in between Lark's Tongues in Aspic and the album Red, which both happen to be my favorite King Crimson albums of all time. So the album Starless and Bible Black, named after a quote from the radio drama of 1954 called Under Milkwood, which by the way seems to me to have the same weight exactly as the name Adam Hart Mother. I'm getting sidetracked. This album is one interesting album with a very interesting backstory to it, much akin to all of King Crimson's discography. But firstly, let's put this one out of the way. So my all-time favorite King Crimson album is Lark's Tongues in Aspic, and my all-time favorite song from theirs is the first part of the title track from it. And you know, I've listened to this one and I always love the way that this album and this piece begun with the great percussion section, which I only thought to be the making, of course, of Bill Bruford. But like a lot of things about King Crimson, I kinda just proved myself wrongful on this. You see, the man behind doing this very interesting percussion opening for Lark's Tongues in Aspic is actually Jamie Muir, who was a part of the band between the years of 1972 and 1973, and in that time he only got to appear in one of their albums, and that's of course Lark's Tongues in Aspic, before he abruptly left the band in search for some spiritual enlightening, and he went on a journey and he joined the monastery, basically distancing himself from anything that has to do with music, and specifically more with King Crimson. So after releasing that album, the band had to tour it, but now they were without Muir, so Bill Bruford just kinda absorbed the role of Muir in the band, and from that point onwards, King Crimson turned from a quintet to a quartet. And in the upcoming months of 1973 and 1974, the band toured a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot. So much to the point when it came time in 1974 to record a new album, these guys had to do so much touring that they literally didn't have enough time to work on studio material for this next album of theirs. But while the band lacked studio time in order to sit down and write new music, one thing that did happen at this time of touring was the better performance of the band, especially when improvising on a live stage. And The best thing about it all is that most of their live improvisations were actually recorded in the shows, and thus the band had a lot of very good material to work with when they wanted to create this next album of theirs. So they went into the studio, and with some retroactive reworking on the pieces, they managed to create an album which is basically a very interesting amalgamation of a lot of improvised material from their various tours. So aside from the first 2 tracks on this album, the rest of the music to be found on here is basically improvised material which had some rework done on it, and most of it was taken from shows around Glasgow, Zurich, and the Royal Concrete Hall shows in Amsterdam. And the sense of improvisation is immediately felt when we are introduced to the 3rd track on this album, which, as I said, is the first fully improvised track on the album to be found, and this one is also a pure instrumental, while other improvisations have been overdubbed with singing by John Wheaton. This 3rd track and another track on this album's side are both just complete instrumental improvisations, and as I see this one, this probably has the most sincerest form of improvisation I've heard in a long while. This song called Will Let You Know is, how I might call it, fragile. It's very fragile. It's not your typical sense of improvisation. It's not like there's one constant drum beat on which someone just improvises a guitar solo or something like that. They've improvised this one from the ground up, starting from nothing and going gradually up from there. And the reason I describe this one as fragile is because every single thing about this improvisation section feels like it can crumble and fall down, tear apart at a moment's notice. The instruments aren't going by a 4/4 beat, they're very sporadic, everything is kind of unexpected, and at each turn you can feel like the band is just going to miss the next beat. But of course, King Crimson being King Crimson, they nailed this one so miraculously, and I loved it to bits. And I don't know what about you, but listening to this piece was very much thrilling for me, because the stress of thinking that they might not succeed pulling off this improvisation was just enough to keep me hooked to this song all the way through. And despite this one being quite a short song from start to finish, I do believe that every single moment on it is pure improvisational brilliance. Now personally, on this A side of the album, I found the tracks The Night Watch and The Mincer to be kind of lesser and kind of lackluster tracks amongst the others. It's not that they're bad, I just don't think that I really enjoyed the aspect of the singing on them, because it kind of did feel unrelated, seeing as it was improvisations upon which we got some overdubbing with lyrics. But if there's one song on this side which is my personal favorite from the album, it's the song called Trio. And this one is kind of an odd one, because I've mentioned earlier that the band at the time were a quartet, yet this song is called a trio. You see, this one has a very interesting backstory to it. So of course it was improvised in a live show, and this one began simply with the Mellotron by Robert Fripp. And as the song progressed, we got to see the introduction of David Cross's viola into the mix, which both created a very interesting sound together. And then out of basically nowhere, we got the looming bass notes by John Wheaton as well. And if there's one thing that we were all basically waiting for to take participation in this one, was of course Bill Bruford and his drums. And as the song progressed, we waited and waited and waited, and alas, Bruford just never joined in. As described by the band, what happened there was basically that Bruford was just sitting at his drum kit with both his sticks in his arms and his arms crossed upon his chest, and he was waiting for the right time to join in the band. But as he noticed that this song progressed, he just realized that it was going into a great direction without his drumming, so he just let it go. And despite what might have been a burning urge to join into the playing, he showed a great restraint in not joining and just letting the song be as it is. And for that, he actually got writing credits for this one, and specifically for showing admirable restraint. And then we move on to the B side of this album, which contains 2 tracks, one being the title track and the other one being Fracture. Now, as much as I want to tell you how much I love these two, and they're really good tracks, I promise, I honestly don't have a lot to say about them. They're pure Crimson improvisation of the best kind that you can possibly imagine. Robert Fripp even described his guitar part in the title track as being probably one of the hardest guitar parts he'd ever have to play, and that's a lot when it's said by a man of his stature. But unfortunately, I really don't have a lot to add about these two other than the fact that this B-side of the album is pure orgasm, and you should all stick around to listen to it as well. But yeah, as a whole, I was never really a devout King Crimson fan. I always liked their music and I enjoyed several pieces more than others, but I don't consider myself as someone that sees any of their albums as perfect. And reviewing on this list 3 of a Perfect Pair and the album Thrack, honestly, it kind of lowered my expectations from this band and lowered my overall reception of their music, and fortunately this album right now kind of proved me wrong in a sense and showed me that King Crimson are as good as I remember them, and even if I didn't like some of their things, it doesn't mean that there are others which I absolutely can dig. So while I was definitely afraid of being disappointed by the album that was sandwiched between the two Goliaths being Larkstings and Aspic and Red, I can say that I was not disappointed, and while it isn't as good as the other two, and for a good reason because it's mostly made out of improvised material and not greatly worked material that was made in the studio, I still do believe that there's a lot to behold with this one, and it's definitely one that I'll be coming back to in the future. So to be honest, I was never really a fan of this cover, and that's maybe one of the reasons why I never checked it out before starting the series as well. And looking at it now and after listening to the music, nothing really changed in that regard. I just really don't dig this kind of cover for King Crimson. I much prefer their more visual based covers with little to no text. But if there's one thing that I will mention about this one is that on its back cover there is a quote stating that the night wounds time, and this quote was taken directly from one of the works of Tom Phillips. Now honestly, the only reason I'm elaborating a bit more about this is because I went ahead and checked out the works of Tom Phillips, and I can definitely tell you that he does some of the utmost interesting types of art that I've ever seen. He basically takes books and collages them and rewrites them in ways that I wouldn't really be able to describe in words. So for you more intrigued viewers, I'd highly suggest for you guys to look up the name Tom Phillips and see what he does, because it definitely blew me away. So this album was definitely a very needed breath of fresh air from this pivotal band, and for this great album that they've produced, they're gonna get the very noteworthy rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Rajas by Camel. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Claywon, Ariston Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best. I have to catch some breath, I'm sorry. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video guys, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.